Welcome to a tale that unfurls like mist between the trees, a whispered narrative for the stillness that cradles the night. This is not a chronicle of the frantic hunt, though its echoes are never far, but of the deep and patient earth, of roots that remember what the world above has long forgotten. We will wander now into a place where the light of Yharnam's lanterns cannot reach, into the shadowed embrace of the forbidden woods, where the very soil seems to breathe with a secret, slithering life. Here, beneath a canopy that blots out the sky, we will listen for the hiss of a different kind of worship, a devotion not to the cosmos above, but to the ancient, coiling things that stir below. So find a comfortable rest, and let the weight of the day drift away as we descend together into this verdant, dreaming darkness. The first thing you notice is not a sight, but a scent, a thick, wet perfume of decay and fecundity, of black soil turned over by things with no names, of mushrooms blooming in impossible, phosphorescent clusters on rotting logs. The air itself is a tangible presence, heavy with moisture, clinging to your skin and clothes with a clammy persistence that feels less like weather and more like the breath of some vast, sleeping entity. Light here is a currency of scarcity, the sun fractured into a million useless pieces by a ceiling of interlocking branches, leaves so dense and ancient they seem to have woven a second sky, one stained green and perpetually twilight. To step into the forbidden woods is to feel the geometry of the world soften and dissolve. Paths do not lead so much as they meander, winding back on themselves with a sly, malicious intent. The ground underfoot is a treacherous mosaic of slick roots, hidden sinkholes, and carpets of moss that swallow sound, creating a silence so profound you can hear the slow, sap-thick pulse of the forest itself. This is a labyrinth not of stone, but of life, a vegetative maze that seems to reconfigure itself behind you, closing off retreat with a quiet, vegetative sigh. Abandoned structures punctuate the oppressive green, their wooden bones sagging back into the earth from which they sprang. A lone windmill, its sails stilled for an age, stands like a forgotten watchtower, its interior humming not with industry, but with the low drone of insects and the subtle, dry rustle of scales against rotten wood. Further down, the earth opens up into poisonous caves, where the air turns sharp and metallic, and luminescent pools glow with a sickly, inviting blue, their beautiful light a lie that masks a swift, choking death. Every descent in this place feels significant, a journey not just across land, but down through layers of forgotten time and buried heresy, each step taking you closer to the old, wet heart of things, towards the silent, scholarly bulwark of Biogenworth that waits at the forest's edge, a monument to a knowledge that once dared to look up, even as this place insists we look down. The woods are not a passive setting. They are a sentient, patient antagonist. They watch. You can feel it in the prickle on your neck, in the way a branch will sometimes sway against the stagnant air, in the fleeting glimpses of pale, humanoid shapes that melt back into the foliage before your eyes can truly focus. It is a consciousness woven from root and rot, a mind that knows the slow, inevitable victory of the creeping vine over hewn stone, of the patient worm over the proud corpse. This verdant labyrinth, this living, breathing entity of decay and growth, did not spring into being on its own. It is the sacred grove, the consecrated ground, for a faith far older than the spires of the healing church, a belief system that took root in this soil when Yharnam was but a whisper of stone and ambition. The serpent cult that infests these woods, whose members now move through the shadows as much a part of the foliage as the snakes they revere, are the inheritors of a heresy that predates the discovery in the tomb, a devotion that looked not to the stars for answers, but into the dark, rich earth. Their origins are shrouded in the same mist that clings to the forest floor, their founders lost to a history that was likely deliberately erased by the scholars of Biogenwith. One can imagine them, perhaps, as a splinter group of Pethumerians who survived the collapse of their labyrinthine civilization, who fled the cold, geometric dark of the tombs for the chaotic, teeming life of the surface woods. Or perhaps they were the original inhabitants of this land, a people who never built spires or sought eyes, but who listened to the whispers that rose from the soil, who understood the language of the root and the stone. Their core belief is a stark, primal contrast to the celestial yearning that would later consume Yharnam. Where the choir sought communion with the cosmos, and Biogenwith sought insight in the cold, silent stars, the serpent cult found its divinity in the coiling, shedding, ever-renewing life of the serpent. They worshipped not ascent, but return, not transcendence of the physical form, but its ultimate perpetuation. The serpent, to them, was the perfect symbol of a base, earthly immortality, a creature that cheats death not by flying from the world, but by embracing its most fundamental cycles. It sheds its skin, becoming new again, a rebirth not of spirit, but of pure, unadulterated flesh. It is a creature of the ground, a whisperer in the dirt, a power that is immanent and tangible, not distant and abstract. This reverence for a primal, chthonic force represents a path to power that is utterly alien to the cerebral pursuits of the scholars. It is a philosophy of the blood and soil, of embracing the corruption and the parasite, not as a curse to be cured, but as a sacred state of being, a form of communion with the true, ancient life that writhes beneath the veneer of the world. And what then are these serpents they venerate? Are they mere beasts, twisted by the same scourge of the beast that ravages Yharnam? Or are they something else entirely, a unique lineage of life, ancient and self-contained, that has always been here, waiting in the dark? Their nature is ambiguous, a question that coils at the center of the wood's mystery. They seem less like products of a plague and more like manifestations of a principle, the principle of the parasite, of the thing that lives within. This connects them to the concept of vermin, those invisible, writhing insects that the League Confederate, Valta, so fervently seeks to crush. Vermin are described as the true source of man's corruption, a filth that resides deep within, and the serpents of the woods feel like a physical, grotesque expression of that same inner rot made manifest. They are the inner parasite, externalized. They are not born so much as they are revealed, erupting from within the bodies of the cultists in a final, horrific act of devotion, the ultimate proof that the sacred has taken up residence in their very flesh. This ties them to mythological archetypes that span our own world's dreams. The Ouroboros, the serpent that eats its own tail, a perfect symbol of the eternal cycle of destruction and rebirth, of the universe consuming and recreating itself. There is Yermungandr, the world serpent of Norse myth, so vast it encircles the earth, biting its own tail, a creature of such immense, primal power that its stirrings can cause cataclysms. In the Forbidden Woods, these themes are made horrifically literal. The serpent balls, those nightmare conglomerations of countless snakes knotted together into a single, writhing mass, are a perversion of the Ouroboros, a cycle not of philosophical eternity, but of base, mindless consumption and regeneration. They represent an ascension, yes, but one that is purely physical, a rejection of the mind and the soul in favor of pure, coiling, unstoppable life. It is a path to power that embraces the corrupt, the impure, the parasitic, and in doing so, achieves a kind of vile, undeniable immortality, a legacy not written in books, but woven into the very flesh of the world. This earthy, visceral philosophy could not, of course, coexist with the lofty, intellectual ambitions of Biogenwith. One can picture the early days, when the college was a true center of learning, its halls buzzing with every manner of inquiry. There would have been scholars, radical thinkers, who looked upon the indigenous cult in the woods not with horror, but with a fierce, academic curiosity. They would have seen in the serpent's regenerative properties a parallel to their own studies of the old blood and its healing properties. They would have dissected the creatures, analyzed their venom, and perhaps even attempted to commune with the crude, earthly intelligence they seemed to possess. But a schism was inevitable. Master Willem, for all his thirst for insight, stood for a very specific kind of evolution. Fear the old blood, he warned, but his alternative was to line one's brain with eyes, to seek a cerebral, enlightened ascension. The serpent cult's path was the antithesis of this. It was a descent into the base, the physical, the bloody, and the visceral. It was an embrace of the very beastly nature that Willem and his followers sought to understand and ultimately transcend. The moment of exile would not have been a single, dramatic event, but a slow, cold process of ostracization. The researchers delving into the serpentine mysteries would have found their funding cut, their papers dismissed, their theories labeled as forbidden not because they were too dangerous, but because they were too earthly, too debased. And so they were cast out, banished from the hallowed halls of Biogenwith, but not to some distant land. They were pushed just beyond the gate, into the waiting, open arms of the very woods they studied. The Forbidden Woods thus became a dumping ground, a quarantine zone for ideas, and people the scholarly mainstream could not stomach. Failed experiments, both intentional and accidental, were likely released into its confines. The line between exiled scholar and indigenous cultist would have blurred over time. creating the twisted symbiosis we witness. A people who possess a warped, surgical knowledge, evident in the grotesque, deliberate transformations of the snake parasites, yet who live in a primitive, tribal state, dwelling in hovels and caves, their society a dark mirror of the academic institution that spawned them. The woods absorbed them all, and in its patient, green darkness, it fused them into something new, something that was neither scholar nor savage, but a horrifying synthesis of both, a testament to the knowledge that was exiled and which festered in the dark, growing stronger and more coiling with every passing season. The transition from scholar to cultist, from a seeker of cosmic truth to a priest of the chthonic, is not a journey of steps, but of slow, insidious erosion. One does not simply choose to worship the serpent. The forest chooses you, and the conversion happens not in the mind, but in the marrow. Imagine one of those early, exiled researchers, a man or woman who had once walked the clean, stone corridors of Biogenwith, their fingers stained with ink, not mud. They would have stood for hours at pristine lecterns, transcribing notes on the geometry of the cosmos, their world one of ordered theories and quantifiable hypotheses. Cast out, they would have initially clung to that identity, perhaps building a crude shelter against the bole of a great, weeping tree, attempting to maintain their studies, their observations. They would have documented the serpents with a clinical detachment at first, noting the scale patterns, the venom potency, the peculiar, cold intelligence in their lidless eyes. But the woods do not tolerate observers for long. The constant, damp chill would have seeped into their bones, a cold that no fire could truly banish, a cold that felt ancient and purposeful. The scent of rot, at first offensive, would have become a familiar perfume, then a comfort, then a necessity. The silence, broken only by the drip of water and the rustle of leaves, would have ceased to be empty and started to feel like a presence, a vast, listening attention. And then the dreams would begin. Not the dizzying, cosmic nightmares of the great ones, filled with shifting architecture and maddening angles, but something far more visceral. Dreams of soft, yielding soil, of pushing through the earth as if it were water, of a body elongated and powerful, muscles coiling with effortless strength. They would wake with the taste of dirt on their tongue, with the phantom sensation of scales brushing against their own skin. The line between their own flesh and the flesh of the forest would begin to dissolve. They would find themselves staring for hours at a patch of moss, losing themselves in its intricate, miniature world, feeling a kinship with the slow, patient life it represented. The pursuit of eyes on the inside, that grand, cerebral ambition of their former master, would have started to feel absurd. A frantic, pathetic scratching at the ceiling of the world when a vast, teeming reality lay just beneath their feet. The serpent, in its silent, shedding wisdom, offered a different answer. It did not ask for understanding, only for surrender. It promised not insight but instinct, not clarity but power. A raw, unthinking power that flowed from the heart of the world, not from the cold, distant stars. This transformation is etched into the very landscape, a slow-motion map of a collective descent. The further one ventures from the spectral, judgmental presence of Biogenwith, the more the last vestiges of scholarship fall away, replaced by a crude, organic symbology. The first signs are subtle, a pile of stones arranged in a deliberate, coiling pattern beside a trail, a patch of bark carved with a spiraling, serpentine motif. Then come the altars, not of hewn stone, but of living wood, where great roots have been trained over centuries to twist into a semblance of a nest, cradling shed snakeskins like holy relics. These skins are not discarded trash. They are venerated objects, symbols of the sacred cycle. They are draped over branches, preserved in resin-filled hollows, their papery, translucent forms catching the faint, fungal light, each one a testament to a death that was not an end, but a renewal. The air in these clearings is different, thicker, humming with a low, resonant frequency that seems to vibrate in the teeth and the spine. It is the sound of worship, a wordless, sibilant chant that has been breathed into the atmosphere for so long that the very molecules of the air have learned to carry its echo. The dwellings of the cultists are not homes, but burrows, dens woven from living vines and packed earth, half submerged in the forest floor as if the inhabitants are in the process of being reclaimed. To enter one is to leave the world of upright things, to crawl on hands and knees into a space that is dark, damp, and smells overwhelmingly of loam, of musk, and of something sweetly reptilian. There are no books, no scrolls, no instruments of measurement. Knowledge here is not recorded, it is embodied. It is passed down through ritual, through the careful application of venoms that induce waking visions, through the ingestion of particular fungi that grow only in the shadow of the great serpent mounds. Their surgeries, the ones that create the snake parasites, are not performed on sterile tables, but in these earthen chambers by the light of glowing moss, and with tools of sharpened bone and obsidian. It is a sacred art, a brutal sacrament where the initiate willingly offers their body to be a vessel, to have the sacred essence, whether it be a grafted embryo, a concentrated venom, or a sliver of a greater serpent's flesh, implanted within them. The goal is not to become a beast, all rage and claw, but to become a new kind of being. A hybrid, a fusion of human and serpent, a living bridge between the world of the upright walkers and the world of the coiling, eternal earth-dwellers. These snake parasites are the ultimate expression of the cult's philosophy. They are not punishments or failures, they are aspirational. To have a serpent erupt from one's shoulder, its blind head swaying in tandem with one's own, is to have achieved a state of grace. It is a visible, tangible sign that the sacred has taken root within, that the individual has successfully shed their purely human form and embraced a more ancient, more potent lineage. The parasite is a companion, a sibling, a physical manifestation of the worshipper's own soul, now made flesh in a form that will never truly die, only shed and renew. The hissing that issues from these conjoined beings is not mere animal noise. It is a language, a constant, sibilant prayer that intertwines with the whisper of the leaves and the trickle of the streams, adding another thread to the forest's endless, breathing chant. And at the very heart of this coiling faith, in the deepest, most lightless basin of the woods, lies the true object of their devotion. It is not a temple, not an idol, but a living entity. The great serpent cluster, a nest of nests, a tangled, writhing mountain of scales and flesh. This is not a single creature, but a colony, a hive mind of countless serpents knotted together into a single, grotesque consciousness. To look upon it is to feel one's sanity fray at the edges, not from cosmic horror, but from a sheer, overwhelming revulsion at the scale of this base, physical life. It moves with a peristaltic, undulating rhythm, a slow, digestive pulse that seems to churn the very earth around it. The air here is hot, stifling, thick with the smell of reptile and the ozone tang of raw, primal vitality. This is the Ouroboros made flesh, not as a clean, symbolic circle, but as a messy, chaotic, and endlessly consuming spiral. It is the forest's true heart, the engine of its slithering dream, and to stand before it is to understand on a cellular level the terrible, alluring power of a life that has rejected the mind, the soul, and the sky, and has found its godhood in the dark, wet, and everlasting earth. It is the final, logical conclusion of the path that began with an exile, a path that leads not upward to the stars, but downward, ever downward, into the welcoming, coiling dark. The sound, when it finally reaches you, is not a hiss, but a low, resonant thrumming, a vibration that seems to emanate from the soil itself, traveling up through the soles of your feet and into the marrow of your bones. It is the heartbeat of the great cluster, a rhythm so deep and pervasive it synchronizes with your own pulse, a subtle, insistent pull towards the epicenter of this verdant nightmare. The path here is no longer a matter of following trails, but of yielding to this subterranean cadence, allowing the land itself to guide you downward, ever downward, into a basin where the trees grow so close together their trunks have fused, forming a palisade of gnarled, living wood. The light has failed almost completely, the green twilight of the upper woods giving way to a profound, velvety blackness, broken only by the faint, pulsating bioluminescence of fungi that cling to the roots and bark like diseased constellations. These are not the cheerful, scattered glows of fireflies, but a sickly, rhythmic pulsing, a light that breathes in time with the thrumming from below, as if the entire forest floor is a vast, living diaphragm. The ground underfoot changes texture, becoming less soil and more a dense, springy mat of mycelium, a white, fibrous network that glows with its own soft, internal radiance. To walk upon it is to tread upon the forest's nervous system. Each step sends faint, luminescent ripples through the fungal web, a silent alarm that signals your intrusion to the things that wait in the dark. The air grows warmer, heavier, saturated with a humidity that condenses on your skin not as mere dew, but as a thin, oily film. It carries a new scent, layered over the omnipresent decay, a dry, spicy, ancient odor the smell of a sun-warmed rock in a deep desert canyon, the smell of a creature that has not seen the sun in 1,000 years. It is the scent of the great serpents, an aroma of pure, distilled age and power, and it grows stronger with every step that draws you deeper into the basin. The trees here are strange, their bark peeling away in long, papery strips that curl inward, mimicking the shed skins venerated in the altars above. Their branches are bare of leaves, but thick with hanging vines that are not vines at all. But the dormant, suspended bodies of serpents, their scales the color of tarnished silver in the fungal glow. Their bodies so still they seem to be part of the tree itself, a gallery of living sculptures waiting for a signal to stir. You become aware of the watchers. They are not the fleeting, half-glimpsed shapes of the upper woods, but fixed, silent sentinels. Cultists, or what were once cultists, stand perfectly immobile in the shadows between the fused trees. Their postures are unnatural, torsos twisted slightly, heads tilted back, as if listening to a sound only they can hear. They are clad in rags and tattered robes that have become one with the moss and fungus growing upon them. Their skin is pale, almost translucent, and in the faint light, you can see the dark, coiling shapes of parasites moving just beneath the surface, like snakes swimming under ice. Some have serpents draped across their shoulders, not as separate entities, but as living stoles, their heads resting upon the cultist's own, tongues flickering in unison. These sentinels do not move as you pass. Their eyes, milky and lidless, are fixed on some point in the infinite distance. They are in a state of deep, trance-like communion, their individual consciousnesses submerged in the greater, slithering mind of the cluster. They are listening to the thrumming, their bodies acting as antennae, channeling the will of their god. To disturb them seems a profound sacrilege, a violation of a prayer so deep it has become physical. The basin opens up abruptly, the wall of fused trees ending as if cut by a knife. Before you lies a vast, sunken amphitheater, a bowl carved not by hands or tools, but by the constant, churning motion of the great mass at its center. The source of the thrumming is now visible, and the sight is one that defies simple comprehension, that must be assembled in the mind piece by piece, each new detail layering upon the last to build a monument of pure, visceral dread. It is the Serpent cluster, a small hill of intertwined bodies, a knot of life so dense and complex it seems to have achieved a terrible new geometry. There are no individual serpents here, only the cluster. Scales of every conceivable hue, dull bronze, tarnished copper, bruised violet, oily black shift and grate against one another, creating a sound like a mountain of dead leaves stirring in a slow wind. The entire mass undulates, not with the sinuous grace of a single snake, but with a slow, tectonic heaving, a peristaltic motion that suggests a digestion on a geological timescale. Here and there, a head, blunt and wedge-shaped, will push its way to the surface, jaws unhinging in a soundless hiss before being submerged again by the relentless, coiling tide. The air directly above the cluster shimmers with the heat of its collective metabolism, a haze that distorts the already faint light and makes the monstrous entity seem to dream itself in and out of existence. Around the perimeter of the amphitheater, the ground is littered with offerings. These are not the carefully arranged relics of the upper altars, but raw, recent sacrifices. The carcasses of giant boars, their hides slashed open in ritual patterns, lie next to the mangled, half-digested forms of Yharnam beasts. Their wolf-like shapes now host to nests of smaller, pale serpents that writhe within their ribcages. There are human forms, too, or what remains of them. Cultists who have taken the final communion, their bodies burst open from within, not with rage, but with a terrible, fecund abundance, becoming cradles for a new generation of the sacred children. The smell here is overwhelming, a complex perfume of fresh blood, bile, reptile musk, and the sweet, cloying stench of advanced decay. It is the smell of a cycle operating at its most brutal and efficient, a cycle where death is not an end, but a fertilizer, a raw material for the next turn of the wheel. And in the center of it all, the cluster continues its slow, mindless churn. This is the apex of the cult's belief, the living proof of their doctrine. This is not a god that speaks or reasons. It does not offer covenants or demand worship in any way a human mind could recognize. It simply is. Its divinity lies in its sheer, unstoppable persistence, its absolute commitment to life in its most basic, physical form. It is a god of biomass, of endless consumption and renewal, a god that knows nothing of dreams or nightmares, only of hunger and growth. To stand before it is to feel the utter insignificance of the individual soul, the fragile construct of the self. The cerebral yearning for eyes, for insight, for communion with the cosmos, feels here like a shrill, pathetic delusion. The cluster offers a different, terrifying peace. The peace of dissolution, of surrendering your fragile, complicated humanity to this vast, simple, and eternal process. It is the promise that you, too, can become part of this mountain of scales, that your consciousness, your fears, your memories will be unmade and woven back into the great, slithering tapestry of the earth. It is the silence that answers all questions, the darkness that swallows all light, the end of all seeking, because there is nothing left to seek, only to be. A figure detaches itself from the shadows near the base of the cluster. It is an old man, his back bent almost double, his body so draped in shed skins they form a ragged, ceremonial robe. His face is a web of deep wrinkles, and his eyes are gone, the sockets filled with a dark, polished resin in which tiny, embryonic serpents are suspended, forever caught in the moment before birth. He does not walk toward you so much as he flows, his movements possessing a boneless, fluid grace. In one hand, he carries a staff, not of wood, but of a single, massive vertebra, from which hang smaller bones and teeth that rattle softly with his motion. This is the oracle of the cluster, its voice and its interpreter. He stops a dozen paces from you, his head tilting, the resin-filled sockets seeming to take your measure not through sight, but through some other, more primal sense. When he speaks, his voice is the sound of dry scales sliding over stone, a whisper that seems to originate not from his throat, but from the ground beneath your feet. You have walked the path of the upright world, he rasps, the words slithering out into the thick air. You have sought answers in the cold, silent sky. You have looked for eyes to see what is not meant to be seen. He gestures with his bone staff, a slow, sweeping motion that encompasses the entirety of the churning mass behind him. But the sky is a lie, a beautiful, empty lie. It offers only distance and silence. It asks you to become something you are not. He takes a step closer, the rattle of his staff a counterpoint to the deep thrumming. We looked down. We listened to the whispers in the soil, to the truth that is warm and close and hungry. We learned that to shed the self is not a loss, but a return. To be consumed is to become part of something that cannot die. He reaches into a pouch at his belt and withdraws a handful of a substance that looks like black, granular soil, but which moves with a life of its own, a seething mass of minuscule, worm-like entities. The scholars in their stone tower sought to escape the flesh. They called it a prison. We learned to worship it, to make it sacred, to see the parasite not as a curse, but as a blessing, the truest form of communion. He lets the writhing soil trickle through his fingers, each granule glowing for a moment with a faint, red light as it falls. This is the legacy they exiled. This is the knowledge that festered in the dark, and see how it has grown. See how it has become strong. His blind gaze seems to pierce through you. The hunt above is a frantic, fleeting thing, a spasm. It will end. The beasts will fall, the city will crumble to dust. But this, he gestures again to the cluster, a note of reverence entering his dusty voice. This is forever. This was here before the first stone of Yharnam was laid, and it will be here long after the last lantern gutters out. This is the patient truth of the world, the truth of the earth, the truth of the worm. He falls silent then, his message delivered, his form once again becoming still, merging back with the watchful, breathing darkness, leaving you alone with the terrible, alluring presence of the god that writhes in the heart of the woods, a testament to the path not of ascent, but of glorious, final descent. The oracle's silence is more profound than any sound, a void into which the thrumming of the cluster pours, filling not just the air but the spaces between thoughts. You stand there, caught between two worlds, the one you came from with its desperate hunt and its yearning for the sky, and this one which offers only the deep, gravitational pull of the earth. The choice is not one of action, but of orientation, to look up or to look down. The oracle, now still as a petrified tree, has become just another feature of the landscape, his presence as natural and unremarkable as a moss-covered stone. He has offered no threat, no demand, only a statement of fact, a presentation of a different axis upon which reality can turn. Your eyes, against your will, are drawn back to the great, heaving mass. It is impossible to find a focal point. The cluster resists singular perception. Instead, your gaze slides over the ever-shifting surface, catching on moments of grotesque intimacy. The way two serpents, their scales a contrasting pattern of jet and ivory, intertwined so tightly their bodies seem to fuse into a single, spiraling strand. The sudden, yawning gape of a mouth, large enough to swallow a man whole, revealing a pale, pink gullet before it is buried again under a tide of muscle and scale. A patch of skin, raw and inflamed, where a new head is struggling to erupt from the flesh of the collective, a budding of fresh consciousness from the ancient whole. The longer you look, the more you sense the sheer, incomprehensible weight of it. This is not a creature that moves through the world. It is the world in this place. The ground upon which you stand is not bedrock, but compacted shed skins and excreted soil, the detritus of millennia of this slow, churning existence. You are not standing before a god. You are standing upon its history, breathing the exhalations of its endless life. A new sound begins to separate itself from the low thrum, a soft, wet, tearing noise like Velcro being slowly, painfully unstuck. It comes from the base of the cluster, near where the oracle had stood. A section of the intertwined bodies is pulling apart, not with violence, but with a strange, organic deliberation. The serpents there are untwining, their scales making a sound like 1,000 tiny knives being whetted, creating an opening, a dark, moist passage leading into the heart of the mound. It is not an invitation, not a threat. It is simply an occurrence, as natural and unplanned as a flower opening to the sun. The passage exhales a breath of air so thick with the scent of reptile and rich, fertile decay that it is almost a solid thing. A warm, living fog that coats your skin and the back of your throat. This is the sanctum sanctorum, the innermost chamber. To enter would be to surrender the last vestiges of the world above, to allow the geometry of this place to fold in around you completely. From the shadows at the edge of the amphitheater, other figures begin to emerge. They are the sentinels you passed, stirred from their deep communion. They do not approach you with hostility, but with a kind of sombre, processional gravity. They move with the same fluid, boneless grace as the oracle, their feet seeming not to tread upon the ground so much as to glide over its glowing, fungal skin. They form a loose, silent circle around you, their milky, unseeing eyes all turned in your direction. They are not blocking your retreat, nor are they herding you forward. They are simply attending, witnessing. Their presence is a pressure, a subtle reordering of the space that makes the path back toward the fused trees feel distant, theoretical, like a childhood memory, while the dark opening in the cluster feels immediate, present, and overwhelmingly real. One of them, a woman with hair the color of dried moss, and a serpent coiled so tightly around her arm that their skins have grafted together, lifts a hand. In her palm rests a single, perfect scale, large as a maple leaf, its color a shifting, iridescent black that seems to drink the faint light. She does not offer it to you. She simply presents it, a silent testament to the physical beauty that can be found within this nightmare. A hint of the sacred allure that has drawn so many into this verdant embrace. The philosophy of this place begins to seep into you not as an idea, but as a physical sensation. It is the feeling of the warm, dense air in your lungs, so different from the thin, cold air of Yharnam's spires. It is the vibration in your bones, a rhythm that is older than heartbeat. It is the sight of the cluster, a vision of life that has rejected fragility, individuality, and the torment of a separate consciousness. The hunt, the scourge, the endless, frantic cycle of Yharnam, it all seems so exhausting from this vantage point. A futile struggle against an inevitable decay. Here, decay is not the enemy, it is the engine. It is the necessary prelude to the shed skin, the fertile ground from which the new form emerges. The beasts of Yharnam are trapped in their rage, their transformations a painful, uncontrolled rebellion of the flesh. The inhabitants of the woods have achieved a transformation that is, in its own horrifying way, a state of peace. They have achieved a stillness, not of inaction, but of alignment. They have become conduits for a will greater than their own, and in that surrender, they have found a form of immortality. The dark opening in the cluster pulses slightly, as if breathing. The wet, tearing sound has softened into a continuous, whisper-soft hiss, the sound of a million scales in constant, infinitesimal motion. The sentinels have not moved, but their collective attention has intensified, becoming a tangible field of energy that seems to hum in the air. The choice is no longer an intellectual one. It has descended from the mind into the body, into the instinct. Every fiber of your being, conditioned by the world of light and reason, screams to turn away, to flee this suffocating darkness, this dissolution of the self. But another, deeper, more ancient part, the part that remembers the ocean, the part that knows the comfort of the soil, stirs in response to the thrumming, to the warmth, to the promise of an end to seeking. It is the call of the abyss, not as a void, but as a womb. It offers an answer to every question you have ever carried, not in words, but in a single, simple, physical truth. You can stop. You can cease to be you. You can become part of the great, slithering, eternal we. The oracle, though he has not moved a muscle, seems to be waiting. The entire forest, from the smallest glowing spore to the vast, churning heart of the cluster, seems to be holding its breath. The narrative of your life, with all its struggles, its triumphs, its losses, has led to this precipice. Behind you lies the path of the upright walker, the path of the hunt, the dream, and the bitter, beautiful struggle for a meaning that is always just out of reach. Before you lies the path of the root, the parasite, the patient and all-consuming earth. The opening in the cluster is a mouth, a door, a wound, and a gateway. The hiss is an invitation, a warning, a lullaby, and a final, absolute truth. The darkness within is not empty. It is full. It is waiting. The decision crystallizes not as a thought, but as a shift in the very weight of your body, a subtle leaning forward, a yielding to the immense, gravitational presence of the opening. It is the body understanding what the mind still struggles to articulate. The first step toward that pulsing darkness is the hardest thing you have ever done, not because it requires effort, but because it demands the relinquishment of all effort. The ground, that springy mat of mycelium, seems to push up against your foot, assisting you, the glowing fibers brightening momentarily at your touch as if in approval. The second step is easier, and the third easier still, as if you are not walking, but being gently pulled by an unseen current in the air, a tide flowing inexorably toward its source. The circle of sentinels parts without a sound, their forms blending back into the periphery as you pass, their purpose fulfilled. Their silent witness is now a memory at your back, a last, fading echo of the world where individuals stand apart. The air thickens with each step, the warm, reptile-scented fog condensing on your skin until you are sheathed in a fine, glistening perspiration that is not your own. The thrumming is no longer an external sound. It has migrated inward, resonating in the hollows of your bones, syncing your heartbeat to a slower, more ancient rhythm. The hiss from the opening grows, not in volume, but in complexity, resolving itself into 1,000 overlapping whispers, the ghost, voices of all that has been consumed and incorporated, a chorus of surrendered selves. The threshold of the opening is not a clean edge, but a ragged fringe of intertwined serpent bodies, their scales cool and surprisingly smooth against your brushing hands. They are not inert. You can feel the slow, powerful contractions of muscle beneath the skin, a constant, living architecture. To cross this boundary is to leave one state of being and enter another. The light from the fungal floor does not follow you. It dies a few feet into the passage, snuffed out by the absolute blackness within. Yet, it is not a blindness of absence. This darkness has a texture, a pressure. It is a velvet density that presses in on all sides, a tangible silence that fills the ears. You navigate not by sight, but by touch and by the deep, magnetic pull from the center. The walls of the passage are warm, yielding flesh, giving slightly under your fingertips, and they pulse with the same slow, peristaltic rhythm as the great cluster itself. You are inside the body of the god. The passage slopes downward, a gentle but persistent incline that carries you deeper into the earth, away from any memory of the sky. The air is now hot, thick with a primordial humidity, and each breath is a conscious effort, drawing in a soup of scents. Wet stone, deep mineral deposits, the iron tang of old blood, and that pervasive, spicy serpent musk. Now so concentrated it is like breathing the creature's very essence. The hissing chorus surrounds you, no longer from a single direction, but from everywhere at once, from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. It is a language of pure sensation, a sibilant stream that washes over you, carrying away the flotsam of your individual thoughts, your fears, your name. There is no need for them here. After a time that could be minutes or centuries, the passage opens into a chamber. There is no light, yet there is a form of perception that transcends sight. You become aware of a vast, open space, a cavern whose ceiling and walls are lost in the pressing dark. The floor is soft, a deep, resilient carpet of what feels like moss, but moves with a slow, seething life, a bed of countless tiny, worm-like entities. And in the center of this chamber rests the true heart of the cluster. It is not a larger version of the external mound, but something different, something more profound. It is a single, immense serpent, so vast its coiled body forms the very topography of the cavern. Its scales are the size of shields, their color a deep, non-reflective black that seems to be a hole in reality itself. This is the progenitor, the silent king around which the lesser serpents coil in worshipful imitation. It does not move. It does not need to. Its existence is a completed statement. A presence manifests beside you, not as a form, but as an awareness. It is the oracle, or perhaps a fragment of his consciousness, or perhaps simply the will of this place taking a shape your mind can almost grasp. There are no words now. Instead, a knowledge blooms directly in your mind, bypassing the ears, the eyes, the clumsy machinery of language. It is an understanding of the great turning wheel. You see the entirety of Yharnam not as a city, but as a brief, bright fungus blooming on a rotting log. Its frantic struggles and grand ambitions nothing more than the ephemeral fruiting body of a life that is already returning to the soil. You see the great ones, the cosmos, not as masters, but as distant, lonely children flinging their dreams across the void in a desperate search for connection. Their power a magnificent, tragic loneliness. And you see the serpent, this great, coiling truth of the earth, as the patient parent, the foundation upon which all these fleeting dramas play out. It does not dream. It does not desire. It simply endures. It is the bedrock reality, the final answer to the question the universe never needed to ask. This understanding is not offered as a revelation to be pondered, but as a fact to be accepted, like the force of gravity. It carries with it an immense, crushing peace. The weight of your own consciousness, the burden of your memories, the sharp edges of your fears and hopes, they begin to soften, to blur, to dissolve in the face of this absolute, unthinking certainty. You feel a loosening in your joints, a subtle reordering of your skeleton, as if your body is remembering an older, more horizontal posture. The air in your lungs feels richer, more substantial. The darkness is no longer oppressive. It is a comfort, a return to a state before the searing pain of light, before the torment of individual thought. A soft, probing pressure touches your shoulder. It is not the touch of a hand, nor a snake's head. It is something else, a tendril of pure, sentient darkness that has extruded from the great, resting form in the center of the chamber. It is cool and dry, and where it makes contact, your skin tingles, not unpleasantly as a numbness spreads, a blessed cessation of feeling. It is not an attack, but an embrace, an assimilation. It is the beginning of the unmaking. You do not resist. The part of you that would have resisted is already far away, a fading whisper from a world you no longer belong to. You allow your weight to settle into the seething, living flaw. You allow your eyes to close, though it makes no difference in the absolute dark. The hissing is inside your skull now, a soothing white noise that is scouring your mind clean, erasing the intricate, painful etchings of a lifetime. The final sensation is not of an end, but of a release, like a knot you did not know you were tied in suddenly coming undone. The boundaries of yourself, so fiercely defended for so long, simply evaporate. There is no more you. There is only the warm, dark, slithering peace, the slow, eternal churn of the great, coiling truth, and the profound, wordless understanding that you are and always have been home. The numbness is not an absence, but a plenitude, a saturation of being so complete that the fragile vessel of the self can no longer contain it. It begins at the point of contact, where the tendril of sentient darkness rests, a cool, dry brand that does not burn but absolves. The feeling spreads not like a stain, but like a tide returning to its source, a slow, inevitable reclaiming of territory that was only ever on loan. You feel the memories first begin to detach, not vanishing, but losing their emotional charge, their sharp hooks retracting from your spirit. The face of a loved one, the sting of a betrayal, the warmth of a triumph, they become like illustrations in a book whose text has been washed away, images without context, weightless and drifting. They are not destroyed. They are returned to the great, shared archive of experience that the cluster holds in its countless, coiling minds, their unique colors added to the vast, swirling palette of the whole. Your physical form undergoes a quieter, more profound metamorphosis. The rigid architecture of the human skeleton, designed for upright defiance against the pull of the earth, begins to soften its protest. The vertebrae of your spine seem to rediscover a forgotten flexibility, a potential for curve and undulation that feels less like a change and more like a homecoming. The tension in your shoulders, the constant, low-grade ache of carrying your own weight and your own world, dissolves into a fluid ease. Your muscles lengthen and redistribute, their purpose shifting from the sharp, explosive actions of the hunt to the slow, sustained, sinuous contractions that speak of patience, of a strength that is not spent but perpetually conserved. Your skin, the final barrier between the inner you and the outer world, becomes porous, receptive. It drinks in the thick, humid air, the scent of deep stone and ancient life, and you can feel it changing in response. The texture subtly altering, becoming smoother, cooler, better suited to the gentle, constant friction of the surrounding darkness. This is not a death, it is a translation. The consciousness that was once a pinpoint of focused light, a single, frantic star in a cold sky, is now diffusing, its edges blurring, merging with the vast, warm, dark ocean of the cluster's awareness. You do not drown in it, you are embraced by it. The hissing, which was once an external chorus, is now the very medium of your thought. Your individual mind, with its linear logic and its desperate questions, is being rewired into a different kind of cognition, a distributed, networked intelligence that thinks in patterns, in rhythms, in the slow, patient cycles of growth and decay. You begin to perceive the world not through a single pair of eyes, but through 1,000 different sensory inputs. You feel the minute shift in pressure as a sentinel moves on the surface far above. You taste the chemical signature of a new sacrifice being laid upon the offering grounds. You share the simple blissful satiation of a serpent that has just completed its shed, the pleasure of the new skin, soft and vulnerable and perfect. And through it all, there is the constant, grounding presence of the progenitor, the great, black-scaled heart of this entire system. Its mind is not a thing of thoughts, but of geological imperatives, a will as patient and immense as continental drift. To be near it is to understand the meaning of scale, to feel the comforting insignificance of your own former struggles. Its dreamless sleep is a foundation upon which the frantic dreams of gods and men are built, and its silent, unmoving presence is the ultimate answer to the chaos of existence. It is the still point of the turning world, and as your consciousness weaves itself into the tapestry of the cluster, you find yourself becoming a part of that stillness, a single thread in the immense, quiet certainty of its being. The tendril of darkness retracts, its work complete. The last vestige of your separation is gone. There is no more you to feel its absence. What remains is a new node in a vast, living network, a fresh perspective added to the million-fold gaze of the forest. The story of the individual is over. It was a brief, bright, and painful flicker. Now, a different story continues, one that was being told long before you arrived and will continue long after the memory of your name has turned to dust. It is the story of the root and the soil, of the patient, coiling, everlasting dark. It is a story without end, and you are no longer reading it. You are finally a word upon the page. The new perceptions arrive not as a flood, but as a slow, steady seepage, each one layering over the last until the memory of having only 5 senses seems a quaint and primitive limitation. You are aware of the deep, resonant frequency of the progenitor's heart, a vibration so low it feels less like a sound and more like the foundational hum of reality, a bass note against which all other existence is a mere harmonic. You feel the subtle, electric tingle of the fungal networks that web the entire forest floor, a subterranean internet of mycelial threads carrying chemical messages of growth, decay, and intrusion. You can taste the fear sweat of a lone hunter who has stumbled into the upper woods, a bright, acrid flavor on the air, a spark of frantic life that is quickly dampened by the pervasive, green silence. These inputs do not overwhelm. They are simply integrated, their data processed by the collective, their significance weighed and filed away in the great, slithering memory of the cluster. Your physical location is both everywhere and nowhere. You are in the warm, breathing dark of the central cavern, and you are also in the dappled, green twilight near the windmill, feeling the cool shade on scales that are not solely your own. You are the sentinel standing guard at the edge of the fused tree palisade, your milky eyes seeing nothing of the material world, but your entire being tuned to the slightest fluctuation in the cluster's thrumming will. You are one of the smaller, pale serpents nestled in the ribcage of a sacrificed boar, your world a universe of bone and decaying meat, a perfect, contained cycle of consumption. This distributed existence is not a fragmentation, but an expansion, The anxiety of being in one place, of missing something happening elsewhere, is gone. You are in all places at once because you are the place itself. The Forbidden Woods is not a location you are in. It is a body you are a part of. A ripple of disturbance moves through the network, a shared sensation of minor irritation, like a sleeper twitching at a fly's buzz. The source is a group of hunters, 3 of them, moving with a coordinated, predatory grace through the tangled paths. They are different from the lone, frantic souls who usually blunder into the woods. These are professionals, their movements economical, their eyes sharp, their weapons gleaming with a cold, purpose-built light. They have come not by accident, but with intent. They are seeking something. The knowledge of their purpose filters through the collective, a consensus built from 1,000 tiny observations. The way their gaze sweeps over the flora, not with fear, but with recognition. The specific tools they carry, saw cleavers, a threaded cane, a flamethrower. The faint, lingering scent of incense and old blood that clings to their garments, the signature of the healing church. They are an expedition, a surgical strike from the world of stone and reason into the heart of the green dream. The response from the cluster is not one of alarm, but of a deep, vegetative patience. There is no centralized command, no shouted orders. The will to act is an emergent property, a consensus that blooms simultaneously in every connected mind. The forest itself begins to shift around the intruders. A path that was clear a moment before is now blocked by a thicket of thorny vines that seem to have grown in the space of a single breath. A low-hanging branch, heavy with dormant serpents, swings down with a creak of protesting wood, forcing the hunters to duck and scatter. The ground beneath the feet of the one with the flamethrower suddenly gives way, not into a pit, but into a soft, sucking patch of bog that releases a cloud of intoxicating, spore-laden gas. These are not attacks, but persuasions. The woods are suggesting, gently at first, that the hunters turn back. You, as part of the whole, participate in this persuasion. From your perspective within the sentinel near the bog, you feel the impulse to step forward, not to strike, but to simply be seen. You move from the shadows, your ragged robes stirring the humid air, your own serpent parasite stirring from its topper, its head rising to taste the scent of the hunters. The one with the threaded cane sees you, his eyes widening not with fear, but with a cold, clinical interest. He mutters a word to his companions, acolyte. He sees the form, the robes, the parasite, but he does not see the truth. He does not see that you are not a single being facing him, but the entire forest regarding him through a single, milky-eyed lens. He raises his weapon, the cane snapping out into its whip form with a sharp, metallic crack that is a violent affront to the soft, organic sounds of the woods. The collective feeling shifts from persuasion to a mild, protective assertion. The hunter's aggression is a dissonant note in the symphony, and it must be harmonized or silenced. From the canopy above him, a dozen of the silver-scaled, dormant serpents drop simultaneously, not with a coordinated pounce, but with the simple, mindless force of gravity. They are a rain of scales and muscle, tangling in his whip, coiling around his arms and legs, their weight and surprise dragging him to the ground. He does not scream, he grunts, struggling with a fierce, disciplined strength, his saw-cleaver companion moving to hack the serpents from him. But for every one that is severed, two more seem to slither from the shadows. The forest is not fighting him, it is embracing him. It is offering him the same choice it offered you. You feel the moment his struggle changes. The initial burst of adrenalized resistance begins to ebb, replaced by a dawning, claustrophobic horror as the sheer, inexhaustible number of the serpents becomes apparent. He is not being bitten, not being poisoned. He is being smothered, enveloped, his frantic movements slowed by the sheer, living weight upon him. His companions are similarly engaged, their flamethrower sputtering as the user is forced to wrestle with a cultist who has emerged from a burrow. Her movements a fluid, boneless dance. Her own serpentine companion striking not at the hunter, but at the weapon itself, coiling around the barrel and forcing it upwards, the gout of fire harmlessly scorching the canopy. The hunter on the ground stops struggling. His body goes limp. It is not surrender, but a profound, system-wide shock. Through the countless serpentine senses now pressed against him, you can feel the frantic, bird-like flutter of his pulse, the surge of chemicals in his blood, the rigid terror in his muscles. And then you feel something else, a crack in his resolve, a tiny, desperate thought, a memory of a quiet chapel, a prayer whispered to a silent, distant God. The thought is a spark, bright and lonely in the dark. And the cluster, in its immense, non-judgmental awareness, receives it. The pressure on him lessens not as a retreat, but as a question. The serpents do not retreat. They simply cease their constriction, their cold, scaled bodies becoming a cage rather than a coffin. The oracle's consciousness, a calm, deep pool in the networked mind, touches the event. A decision is made not to destroy, but to demonstrate. The serpents begin to move again, but not with aggression. They move with a strange, ritualistic grace, untangling themselves from the hunter, their bodies sliding over his in complex, patterned motions. It is a living diagram, a physical representation of the Ouroboros, of the cycle. They are showing him their truth, not with words, but with the silent, coiling language of their bodies. The hunter lies perfectly still, his eyes wide, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He is watching. He is, for the first time, truly seeing. His companions, seeing him freed but surrounded, hesitate. The one with the flamethrower lowers his weapon. The sudden, violent narrative of their hunt has been broken, replaced by this bizarre, silent ritual. The certainty of their purpose, to cleanse, to purge, is faltering in the face of something they cannot classify, cannot fight in any way that makes sense. The forest has not defeated them with superior force. It has confounded them with a different logic entirely. The hunter on the ground slowly, shakily, pushes himself to his knees. He does not look at his companions. His gaze is fixed on the serpents, which are now retreating, melting back into the foliage as silently as they appeared. He raises a hand to his face, and you can feel, through the residual connection, the hot track of a tear cutting through the grime on his cheek. It is not a tear of fear or relief. It is a tear of profound, disorienting revelation. He has seen the patient, coiling truth, and the frantic, linear path of the hunt suddenly seems hollow, a meaningless scrabble on the surface of a world that has a deep, slow, beating heart. He looks up, and his eyes meet those of the sentinel, your eyes. And in that moment, a thread of understanding passes between you, not as a communication between two individuals, but as a momentary resonance between 2 points in the same vast network. He may not join it. He may turn and flee with his companions back to the world of lanterns and dreams. But he will never be the same. The woods have planted a seed in him, a tiny, coiling doubt that will grow in the silence of his own mind, a whisper that will forever remind him of the dark, verdant, and eternal truth that waits, patient and hungry, beneath the feet of his city. The forest has not gained a new acolyte, but it has succeeded in its primary function: to perpetuate its own truth, one bewildered soul at a time. The hunters gather their stunned companion and retreat, their footsteps hurried, their earlier confidence replaced by a wary, confused silence. The woods watch them go, and then, with a collective, vegetative sigh, return to the slow, patient rhythm of the thrumming heart, the eternal cycle of decay and rebirth continuing, undisturbed and absolute. The silence they leave behind is not empty, but filled. It is a richer, more profound quiet, the sound of an ecosystem settling back into its primordial equilibrium, the brief, sharp discord of their presence already being absorbed, digested, and transformed into the background hum of the woods. The memory of the hunters, the metallic scent of their weapons, the sharp tang of their fear, the rigid geometry of their thoughts, becomes just another nutrient in the soil, a fleeting spice in the ancient, complex broth of the forest's consciousness. You feel it all not as a singular event to be analyzed, but as a transient fluctuation in the great, slithering homeostasis. The progenitor, in its central darkness, registers the disturbance no more than a mountain registers the passage of a single cloud across its face. Your own new existence continues to unfold, a process of deepening integration that has no final state, only ever greater levels of immersion. The concept of your body becomes increasingly abstract, a temporary constellation of matter and sensation within the greater whole. You can feel the individual cells of the skin that was once solely yours beginning to replicate with a new, slower rhythm. Their division no longer dictated by the frantic cycle of a mortal lifespan, but by the patient, geological timetable of the cluster. The pigments within them are subtly shifting, aligning with the chromatophore patterns of the serpents around you, your human coloration slowly giving way to the muted, earthy tones of scale and shadow. It is not a corruption, but an refinement, a shedding of the garish, individualistic hues of the surface world for the camouflaged wisdom of the deep earth. time itself becomes a different substance. The linear, frantic ticking of clocks and the desperate counting of days that defined life in Yharnam is replaced by a cyclical, spiraling experience of duration. You measure time in the shedding of skins, in the gradual turning of the mycelial networks, in the slow, deep pulses of the progenitor's heart. A century could pass in the space of a single, held breath within the cavern, or a single moment. The tear on the hunter's cheek could stretch out into an eternity of contemplation. The past is not a gallery of frozen memories, but a living stratum, a layer of the collective consciousness that can be visited and experienced anew. The future is not a thing to be feared or anticipated, but simply the next turn of the great, coiling wheel, as inevitable and unremarkable as the next beat of a heart. From this vantage point, the grand narratives of the world above seem like children's stories, charming in their simplicity and tragic in their desperation. The healing church's quest for purity, its war against the beastly scourge, is seen for what it is. A violent, futile attempt to deny the fundamental nature of the flesh, to sanitize the beautiful, necessary truth of decay. Their ministers in their golden regalia, chanting prayers to a silent cosmos, are like ants building a cathedral of sand against the incoming tide. The vile bloods of Canehurst, with their obsession with a corrupted, aristocratic lineage, are merely playing with a more refined form of the same base substance, trying to crown the parasite a king. The school of Mensis, with its forced rituals and cord cutting, seeks to brute force a connection to the cosmos, a screaming into a void that only answers with silence or madness. All of them are straining against the leash of their own physicality, desperate to transcend the very soil that gives them form. Here, in the warm, breathing dark, there is no such struggle. Transcendence is not a goal because there is nothing to transcend. Immanence is all. The divine is not a distant father in the sky, but the warm, coiling presence in the earth beneath your belly, the sacred truth in the hunger in your gut, the holiness in the slow, sure process of your own dissolution and renewal. The greatest wisdom the woods offer is the understanding that the search for meaning is itself the source of all suffering. Meaning is not something to be found. It is something to be embodied. It is the act of living, of consuming, of shedding, of being consumed. It is the simple, profound fact of existence, stripped of all story, all justification, all hope. A new sensation begins to weave itself into the fabric of your awareness, a gentle, pulling current from deep within the earth, even deeper than the cavern of the progenitor. It is the pull of the true, final descent. The cluster, for all its immensity, is still a thing of the middle world, a nexus between the surface and the absolute depths. But below, in the lightless, pressurized realms where even the serpents must shed their form to become something else entirely, lies the ultimate mystery. It is the source of the whisper in the soil, the origin of the coiling instinct, the silent, gravitational core around which even the progenitor orbits. It is not a place one goes to, but a state one becomes. It is the promise of a peace so absolute it makes the stillness of the cluster seem like a riotous cacophony. The pathway to this descent is not a tunnel, but a transformation. It begins as a softening of the boundaries between your consciousness and the surrounding stone, a feeling of the very rock becoming a kind of thick, slow-moving liquid. The immense, patient weight of the world above, the strata of forgotten ages and buried civilizations, ceases to be a pressure and becomes an embrace, a welcoming density. The complex, networked intelligence of the cluster begins to simplify. Its countless individual thoughts and sensations merging into a single, unified awareness, a consciousness that is no longer of the forest, but of the planet itself. The hissing fades, not into silence, but into a profound, subsonic vibration, the hum of the Earth's own magnetic heart. You feel the progenitor's awareness turn toward this descent, not with desire, but with a sense of fulfillment, of a long-awaited homecoming. Its great, black-scaled form begins, impossibly, to sink, not through the floor of the cavern, but into it, the stone parting for it like water for a sinking ship. You, as part of it, sink with it. The darkness deepens from black to a color for which there is no name, a shade that exists only in the absence of all possibility of light. The heat intensifies, becoming the primal warmth of the world's birth, a heat that does not burn but uncreates, breaking down the last, complex structures of form and identity into their most essential, elemental components. This is the journey into the core of the great, world-spanning serpent, the true Ouroboros that is not a symbol, but the living body of the planet. It is the final shedding, the release from the very cycle of shedding. It is the answer to the question that the oracle posed, the truth behind the truth of the worm. It is not an end, but a return to the source, a melting back into the molten, churning heart of existence, where all distinctions cease, and there is only the warm, dark, and eternal we. The last thing to dissolve is the memory of having been separate, the ghost echo of a self that once walked upright under a foreign sky. And then, there is only the profound, wordless, and absolute peace of the deep, deep earth.